Housing is a key component of individual and family. In addition to being a place where family and friends can gather, housing is important for a sense of security and privacy. One significant aspect of security is the wealth in the homes of owner-occupiers. The wealth of households increases as the wealth or equity in the homes of owner-occupiers increases through paying off outstanding housing loans or as property values rise. In 2003 to 2004, the primary residence was, on average, the most valuable asset of owner-occupier households, with the net value of owned homes accounting for an average of 55% of the net worth of those households.
Pop art was a cultural movement that began in the mid-20th century, turning to everyday life as a source of inspiration. American artists often used familiar subjects from their surroundings, such as beer bottles, clothing, comic strips, and advertisements, to create bold and striking artworks. In the United Kingdom, however, pop art drew heavily from imagery found in magazines, as well as archives and mass media culture. Together, these approaches made pop art one of the most accessible and influential movements in modern art.
York was once a rich and populous city. Many houses blocked the narrow streets in the district, creating crowded living conditions. Records also show details about daily life, including the number of meals served every day. Religious festivals are held in St. Mary's Church, which remain an important part of York's traditions.
For our purposes, the words invention and innovation can be used interchangeably. More specifically, however, the term invention refers to the discovery of new products or processes, while innovation refers to the commercialization, bringing to the market, of new products or processes. Furthermore, we can distinguish between product innovations and process innovations. Product innovations result in the production of a new product, such as the change from a three-wheel car to a four-wheel car, or the change from LP records to CDs. Process innovations increase the efficiency of the methods of production of existing products. For example, the invention of the assembly line technique. The inventions and innovations that form industrial revolutions are those that open new doors and create new ways of doing things, not simply those that fill gaps in existing ways of doing things. Mokia, 1997. The core of the first industrial revolution in the 18th century was a succession of technological changes that brought about material advances in three basic areas. 1. The substitution of mechanical devices, such as machines, for human labor. 2. The substitution of inanimate sources of power, such as steam, for animate sources of power, such as horsepower. And 3. The substitution of mineral raw materials for vegetable or animal substances, and in general, the use of new and more abundant raw materials.
Folklore, a modern term for the body of traditional customs, superstitions, stories, dances, and songs that have been adopted and maintained within a given community by processes of repetition, is not reliant on the written word. Along with folk songs and folk tales, this broad category of cultural forms embraces all kinds of legends, riddles, jokes, proverbs, games, charms, omens, spells, and rituals, especially those of pre-literate societies or social classes. Those forms of verbal expression that are handed on from one generation or locality to the next by word of mouth are said to constitute an oral tradition.
Children have sound sleep patterns. They can soundly sleep for 8 to 9 hours and get up at a fixed time. But teenagers don't. Their sleep patterns are influenced by their erratic schedules, in which they sometimes have more classes but sometimes have fewer. Despite these factors, they actually need longer sleep, and insufficient sleep may be responsible for their learning problems.
Wind is air moving around. Some winds can move as fast as a racing car, over 100 miles an hour. Winds can travel around the world. Wind can make you feel cold because you lose heat from your body faster when it is windy. Weather forecasters need to know the speed and direction of the wind. The strength of wind is measured using the Beaufort scale from wind force when there is no wind to wind force 12, which can damage houses and buildings and is called hurricane force.
The exponential growth of the internet was heralded in the 1990s as revolutionizing the production and dissemination of information. Some people saw the internet as a means of democratizing access to knowledge. For people concerned with African development, it seemed to offer the possibility leapfrogging over the technology gap that separates Africa from advanced industrialized countries.
Barry Finnings, a professor at Monash University's College of Pharmacy in Melbourne, and PhD student Anita Schneider recently tested a new wrinkle cure. Twice daily, 20 male and female volunteers applied a liquid containing maoxinol, a patented extract of okra, Hibiscus esculentus seed, to one side of their faces. On the other side, they applied a similar liquid without maoxinol. Every week for a month, their wrinkles were tested by self-assessment, photography, and the size of depressions made in silicone molds. The results were impressive. After a month, the depth and number of wrinkles on the myoxinol-treated side were reduced by approximately 27%. But Finnen's research, commissioned by a cosmetics company, is unlikely to be published in a scientific publication. It's hard to even find studies that show the active ingredients in cosmetics penetrate the skin, let alone more comprehensive research on their effects. Even when rigorous studies are commissioned, companies usually control whether the work is published in the traditional scientific literature.
Good sense appears to have prevailed at last. With a fresh set of draft rules to replace last year's poorly conceived ones, the Centre has sought to withdraw the ban on sale of cattle for slaughter in animal markets. The draft rules are now open for comments and suggestions. When the Union Ministry for Environment, Forests and Climate Change notified the rules under the Prevention of the Cruelty to Animals Act on May 23, 2017, there was concern that in the name of preventing cruelty to animals and regulating livestock markets, the government was surreptitiously throttling the cattle trade and furthering the BJP's cow protection agenda. The rules were criticized for restricting legitimate animal trade and interfering with dietary habits.
Antarctic plants can be important indicators of subtle changes in environmental conditions, including climate change. Traditional ground-based assessments of vegetation health are, however, not ideal in Antarctica, as they can destroy the vegetation and are physically demanding in the harsh weather conditions. Co-author Professor Sharon Robinson from UOW's School of Biological Sciences said the study found drone-based monitoring of vegetation health produced similar results to traditional techniques, but with much greater efficiency and with no damage to the vegetation. Drones are a powerful tool for monitoring fragile Antarctic vegetation, Professor Robinson said. They could be used to provide timely warnings about specific environmental stress events, as well as monitoring the longer-term impacts of climate change. These methods could also be adapted to monitor the health of other small-stature, patchy plant communities, including in alpine or desert regions. The researchers found that drones, equipped with sensors, were able to detect vegetation health indicators more accurately than satellite imagery. Mosses are one of the key Antarctic vegetation types that need to be monitored. However, they tend to occur in patches among rocks, ice, and soil, making it important that the imagery used to assess their health is as accurate and spatially detailed as possible.
Families provide emotional, physical, and financial care and support to their members, and are often the basis on which government assistance is determined and administered. Australians have traditionally experienced three main living arrangements over a life cycle: living with parents, living with a partner, for some of this period with children, and living alone in old age if that partner died. Now and into the future, living arrangements throughout a life cycle may also include living alone or in a group household before perhaps forming a long-term partnership, or living as a ione parent or alone after divorce or separation. These changes in living arrangements and family characteristics are the outcome of various demographic and social trends, such as declining fertility, increased rates of divorce, and longer life expectancy.
Jennifer Harris, a researcher at the University of Connecticut's Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity, has studied the impact of food advertising on children's eating behaviors. In one key experiment, children aged 7 to 11 watched a cartoon interspersed with either food or non-food advertisements. Afterward, they were given a bowl of cheddar cheese crackers to snack on. The results showed that children exposed to food ads consumed 45% more snacks than those who saw non-food ads. This study suggests that food advertising can significantly increase snack consumption among children, potentially contributing to unhealthy eating habits and obesity. Food ads, often designed with colorful packaging and appealing characters, trigger cravings in children, making them more likely to choose unhealthy, calorie-dense snacks. These advertisements create emotional associations between eating the product and feelings of enjoyment or fun, further encouraging children to indulge. The findings highlight the need for stricter regulations on food advertising targeting children. By reducing exposure to these ads, it may be possible to mitigate their influence and promote healthier eating habits. Harris's research underscores the importance of protecting children from marketing practices that could lead to long-term health issues, such as obesity.
In the framework of Bourdieu's theory, human society operates through a complex system of classifications, where social groups are defined not only by their material resources, but also by their cultural capital, forms of knowledge, taste, and practice that are valued by dominant social structures. These patterns of thought shape how individuals view themselves and others, perpetuating a hierarchy of power and status. The dominant classes, in particular, maintain their status by controlling these classifications, defining what is considered legitimate or refined knowledge, and thus marginalizing other ways of thinking and being. Bourdieu's concept of habitus describes how these patterns of thought become internalized in individuals, guiding their actions and perceptions in ways that reinforce the existing social system. At the same time, the process of classification is not fixed, but subject to contestation. Over time, the dominance of elite groups can be challenged, leading to shifts in the status of certain forms of knowledge or cultural practices. In this sense, Bourdieu suggests that the social structure is not merely a reflection of economic power, but also a reflection of the intellectual and cultural systems that preserve it. The task, therefore, is to recognize how these classifications function to legitimize power and to question the hierarchical systems that serve to reduce the status of those on the margins.
The normal novel is dying. People nowadays prefer to engage in other forms of entertainment, such as music, rather than reading books during their leisure time. However, Ironically, a survey conducted by a certain organization or website reveals that the number of potential online writers, particularly in the genre of novels, is continuously increasing. This contradiction highlights the fact that despite the decline in reading books, global literacy rates are at an all-time high. This signals a shift in how people consume and engage with literature. While novels may be losing popularity as a medium, the rise of online writers and the overall improvement in literacy rates underscore the enduring importance and value of written communication. It also challenges the notion that literature is dying and suggests that it is merely evolving to adapt to the preferences and habits of modern readers. In conclusion, the novel, like any other art form, may transform in response to changing times, but is far from fading away.
The lute, a plucked string instrument, played a central role in European music from the late Middle Ages through the Baroque period. Its pear-shaped body and fretted neck made it a versatile instrument for both solo and ensemble performances. Unlike the modern guitar, the lute typically has paired strings, which produce a richer, more resonant tone. During the Renaissance, the lute was highly valued by both professional musicians and amateur players. Its popularity gradually declined in the 18th century as keyboard instruments became more fashionable. Nevertheless, the lute remains an important subject of study for those interested in early music performance practices, and it is frequently used in historically informed concerts today.
The lack of interest among adolescents in school science courses is a complex issue, but two factors are particularly critical. Contemporary students live in a culture that increasingly emphasizes self-reflection and autonomy, and the range of subjects they are confronted with is far broader than in the past. Adolescence is a key period for the formation of identity, and ample evidence shows that the way subject choices contribute to one's sense of self, particularly in how they reflect personal values, is crucial for young people. Specifically, science curricula need to more clearly demonstrate the career pathways that science can offer, both within scientific fields and in science-related professions, and articulate why these careers are valuable, meaningful, and rewarding.
John F. Kennedy had a high academic degree and was handsome, with a Hollywood-style appearance. He was the most popular politician, partly because of his heroism in the war. He was awarded a medal in the war to prove his personal courage, and these qualities, along with his charisma, made him admired by the public. Because of these three characteristics, he became iconic in people's eyes. He was also blessed with handsome looks, a mending political style, and a beautiful wife. All of this helped him prepare in advance for his re-election campaign.
IBM arranged a video game match between a supercomputer and human gamers. The fact that the computer has competed against humans made people worry whether scientific technologies could threaten us. However, the computer can only perform programs that are set by us. Even machine learning has not yet developed enough to think independently like humans.
The Durham University Sailing Boat Club was founded decades ago and grown steadily over the years. Today, it is a thriving club with many students actively enjoying sailing as both a sport and a social activity.
The teaching of languages could be revolutionized following groundbreaking research by Victoria University, New Zealand, PhD graduate Paul Sulzberger. Dr. Sulzberger has found that the best way to learn a language is through frequent exposure to its sound patterns, even if you haven't a clue what it all means. However crazy it might sound, just listening to the language, even though you don't understand it, is critical. A lot of language teachers may not accept that, he says. Our ability to learn new words is directly related to how often we have been exposed to the particular combinations of the sounds which make up the words. If you want to learn Spanish, for example, frequently listening to a Spanish language radio station on the internet will dramatically boost your ability to pick up the language and learn new words. Dr. Sulzberger's research challenges existing language learning theory. His main hypothesis is that simply listening to a new language sets up the structures in the brain required to learn the words.
When you have bought a bad product, you should not buy it anymore. You might even tell your friends about it and be reluctant to purchase anything else from the same company. On the other hand, a well-designed product is either good quality or highly durable, encouraging customers to remain loyal.
The main purpose of fieldwork is to offer students a chance to apply what they have learned in the classroom to real-life situations. By doing so, they gain experience that cannot be obtained from books alone.
Of course, for as long as there have been objects, they have been designed. Yet, design only emerged as a dedicated discipline in the 19th century, and its literature and theory is still very much in its infancy. It is curious that, despite the increasingly prominent role that self-consciously designed commodities play in our everyday lives and in the way we define ourselves, the literature around the subject is hugely disappointing. In fact, beyond bland coffee table books, it is barely there at all. Nicholas Pevsner's Pioneers of Modern Design, a classic Hegelian text treating modernism as the inevitable outcome of a historical process, is, despite being first published in 1936 and hopelessly dated, still the key text. There have been other books, from quirky Bruno Munari, Design as Art, to deadpan Norman Potter, What is a Designer? Things, Places, Messages, and Don Sujik's 2008, The Language of Things, which attempted a broader examination. Nevertheless, there is surprisingly little critique, an almost complete absence of theory, and little genuinely popular, compelling writing on the subject.
Farmers should fertilize their fields to ensure healthy crop growth. Fertilizer has a strong effect on agricultural productivity. The real problem is that farmers often do not know how much fertilizer they should use, which can lead either to poor yields or to harmful overuse.
All of this suggests that our relationship to our phones might not be sufficiently intellectualized, which is why Brian Merchant's book comes as a relief. Like the best historians, Merchant, an American journalist and editor of Vice Media's technology blog, Motherboard, unpacks the history of the iPhone in a way that makes it seem both inevitable in its outline and surprising in its details.
Whether you have blue eyes or brown, lactose tolerance or intolerance, curly hair or straight, the roots of these traits lie in your DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, is the hereditary material in humans and almost all other organisms, containing the biological instructions that make each species unique. DNA, first identified in the late 19th century, and whose structure as a double helix was discovered in 1953 by Watson and Crick, is present in the nucleus of every cell in an organism. It's estimated that if unwound and linked together, the strands of DNA in one cell would stretch almost 6 feet in length. For many years, the complexity of DNA made understanding the full extent of its influence a distant dream. However, with the advent of advanced genomic technologies, scientists have made groundbreaking strides in understanding and mapping the human genome.
My name is Tonya. My roommate and I are looking for a nice apartment near my college's campus. We are very quiet and study a lot. I study history, and my roommate studies French. We are very interested in renting your apartment. We can pay the rent on time because we do a part-time work too. Some of our friends live in the same building and have recommended your place to us. They mentioned that you are a kind and responsible landlord, and we hope to have the same positive experience. I would like to make an appointment to view the apartment in person. Our application form is ready, and we are prepared to proceed with the process quickly. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Best regards, Tonya.
New BC, residents will only be required to provide their driver license history. Proof of insurance is no longer required. However, their premiums will be adjusted for the first 3 years of driving in BC, due to the increased risks associated with driving in a new area. Each year you remain crash-free, your discount increases. ICBC will credit you with up to 15 years of driving experience, up from 8 years, upon receipt of a driver's abstract showing the original date that you received your license. When obtaining your BC license, you can provide your original driver's abstract in person at a driver licensing office.
The supply of a thing, in the phrase supply and demand, is the amount that will be offered for sale at each of a series of prices. The demand is the amount that will be bought at each of a series of prices. The principle that value depends on supply and demand means that in the case of nearly every commodity, more will be bought if the price is lowered, less will be bought if the price is raised. Therefore, sellers, if they wish to induce buyers to take more of a commodity than they are already doing, must reduce its price. If they raise its price, they will sell less. If there is a general falling off, if in demand, due say to trade depression, sellers will either have to treat prices or put less on the market. They will not be able to sell the same amount at the same price. Each of us is born into and raised in a particular time world, an environment with its own rhythm to which we entrain ourselves. Certain cultures have related to time as a cyclical phenomenon, in which there is no pressure or future anxiety. The whole of existence goes around, the cycle of the seasons, of planting and harvesting, the daily return of the sun, of birth and death. In circular time there is no pressing need to achieve and create newness, or to insatiably produce more than is needed to simply survive. Additionally, there is no fear of death. Such societies have successfully integrated the past and future into a peaceful sense of the present. They also honored the wisdom of elders who held the knowledge of the past, upon which the future was clearly linked.
In an often cited study about counterfactuals, Medvec, Mady, and Gilovich, 1995, found that bronze medalists appeared happier than silver medalists in television coverage of the 1992 Summer Olympics. Medvec et al. Argued that bronze medalists compared themselves to fourth-place finishers, whereas silver medalists compared themselves to gold medalists. These counterfactuals were the most salient because they were either qualitatively different, gold versus silver, or categorically different, metal versus no metal, from what actually occurred. Drawing on archival data and experimental studies, we show that Olympic athletes, among others, are more likely to make counterfactual comparisons based on their prior expectations, consistent with decision effect theory. Silver medalists are more likely to be disappointed because their personal expectations are higher than those of bronze medalists. Away from the rumble of Shanghai's highways and the cacophony of the shopping districts, stroll down side streets filled with rows of all brick houses. In the early evening or on a weekend morning, you'll hear the sound of classical music drifting from a piano, played by a 10-year-old or a grandmother in her 70s. Wander down another alley toward concrete skyscrapers, and you'll hear Beethoven or Mozart flowing from a violin, or perhaps a cello, accordion, or flute. In China, classical music is booming as mightily as the 1812 overture, commanding yaw 00, 200, 512.50425 per hour. Private music teachers in Shanghai can readily earn more than 5 times the average per capita monthly income.
To better understand selfies and how people form their identities online, the researchers combed through 2.5 million selfie posts on Instagram to determine what kinds of identity statements people make by taking and sharing the photos. Nearly 52% of all selfies fell into the appearance category, pictures of people showing off their makeup, clothes, lips, etc. Overall, an overwhelming 57% of selfies on Instagram were posted by the 18 to 35-year-old crowd, something the researchers say isn't too surprising, considering the demographics of the social media platform. The under 18 age group posted about 30% of selfies.
Why does the smell of cut grass remind you of summer? How can you measure your nerve endings with a paper fastener? And how can you create the sound of church bells with just a serving spoon and a piece of string? These fascinating questions and more will be revealed by University of Manchester scientists when they take to the road on their brain bus. The bus is taking hands-on activities to test the senses to the suburbs, to show young and old alike how the brain works and how science can answer some of life's most captivating questions. Organizer Dr. Stuart Allen, lecturer at the Faculty of Life Sciences, explains, 3-year-olds and upwards can understand the senses, and it's an area that is intriguing to all ages. It takes effort to get out of bed on a Saturday morning and go to the museum. We are bringing science to your doorstep and going further afield this year in the hope of finding new and different audiences. We want people to see that science is interesting as well as important in our lives, and to encourage people who may not consider it possible to go to university.
Discrimination against women has been alleged in hiring practices for many occupations, but it is extremely difficult to demonstrate sex-biased hiring. A change in the way symphony orchestras recruit musicians provides an unusual way to test for sex-biased hiring. To overcome possible biases in hiring, most orchestras revised their audition policies in the 1970s and 1980s. A major change involved the use of blind auditions with a screen to conceal the identity of the candidate from the jury. Female musicians in the top 5 symphony orchestras in the United States were less than 5% of all players in 1970, but are 25% today. We ask whether women were more likely to be advanced and/or hired with the use of blind auditions. Using data from actual auditions in an individual fixed effects framework, we find that the screen increases by 50% the probability a woman will be advanced out of certain preliminary rounds. The screen also enhances by several-fold the likelihood a female contestant will be the winner in the final round. Using data on orchestra personnel, the switch to blind auditions can explain between 30% and 55% of the increase in the proportion female among new hires, and between 25% and 46% of the increase in the percentage female in the orchestras since 1970.
At the height of summer in the Antarctic, tourist ships moved gently around the coast. Even 30 years ago such sights would have been unthinkable, but today people are willing to pay large sums of money to see the last real wilderness in the world. In the Arctic, careless human exploitation in the past has damaged the fragile ecosystem. Today, concerned governments are trying to find ways to develop the region, while caring for the very special natural environment. Because the Antarctic is less accessible than the Arctic, it is still largely undamaged by humans, although holes in the ozone layer above the Antarctic have already been discovered. Many people believe that one way to preserve the area is to make the whole region into a world park, with every form of exploitation internationally banned. Life in the UK 2012 provides a unique overview of well-being in the UK today. The report is the first snapshot of life in the UK to be delivered by the Measuring National Wellbeing Programme and will be updated and published annually. Well-being is discussed in terms of the economy, people, and the environment. Information such as the unemployment rate or number of crimes against the person are presented alongside data on people's thoughts and feelings. For example, satisfaction with our jobs or leisure time and fear of crime. Together, a richer picture on how society is doing is provided.
With the increase in women's participation in the labor force, many mothers have less time available to undertake domestic activities. At the same time, there has been increasing recognition that the father's role and relationship with a child is important. A father can have many roles in the family, ranging from income provider to teacher, carer, playmate, and role model. Therefore, balancing paid work and family responsibilities can be an important issue for both fathers and mothers in families.
The recipe for making any creature is written in its DNA. So last November, when geneticists published the near-complete DNA sequence of the long-extinct woolly mammoth, there was much speculation about whether we could bring this behemoth back to life. Creating a living, breathing creature from a genome sequence that exists only in a computer's memory is not possible right now. But someone someday is sure to try it, predicts Stephen Schuster, a molecular biologist at Pennsylvania State University, University Park, and a driving force behind the Mammoth Genome Project.
Recently, research into embryonic development has given us an even better insight into how major structural changes might occur in a given population of organisms. We now understand that there are two major types of genes: developmental and housekeeping genes. Developmental genes are those that are expressed during embryonic development, and their proteins control the symmetry, skeletal development, organ placement, and overall form of the developing animal. In contrast, housekeeping genes are expressed during the animal's daily life to generate proteins which keep the cells, tissues, and organs in the body functioning properly. As you might suspect, mutations in developmental genes can have radical consequences for body form and function, whereas mutations in housekeeping genes tend to affect the health and reproductive success of the post-embryonic animal.
Managing performance is about getting people into action so that they achieve planned and agreed results. It focuses on what has to be done, how it should be done, and what is to be achieved. But it is equally concerned with developing people, helping them to learn, and providing them with the support they need to do well now and in the future. The framework for performance management is provided by the Performance Agreement, which is the outcome of performance planning. The agreement provides the basis for managing performance throughout the year and for guiding improvement and development activities. It is used as a reference point when reviewing performance and the achievement of improvement and development plans.
Decision-making is central to the management of an enterprise. The manager of a profit-making business has to decide on the manner of implementation of the objectives of the business. at least one of which may well relate to allocating resources so as to maximize profit. A nonprofit making enterprise, such as a department of central or local government, will be making decisions on resource allocation so as to be economical, efficient, and effective in its use of finance. All organizations, whether in the private sector or the public sector, take decisions which have financial implications. Decisions will be about resources, which may be people, products, services, or long-term and short-term investment. Decisions will also be about activities, including whether and how to undertake them. Most decisions will at some stage involve consideration of financial matters, particularly cost.
Children who skip school are increasingly on family holidays, government figures revealed today. Fewer children played truant this spring term compared with the spring term last year. Children missed 3M unauthorized days of school last term compared with 7M days of school in the same period last year. But a hardcore group of truants, 6% of the school population, who account for more than 3/4 of all those on unauthorized absence, are more likely to be on a family holiday than they were in the same period last year. Some 1.2% of all absence was for family holidays not agreed by their school last term, compared with 0.9% for the same term last year. More than 60% of all absences were for illness, the same figure as last year.
The study of objects constitutes a relatively new field of academic inquiry, commonly referred to as material culture studies. Students of material culture seek to understand societies, both past and present, through careful study and observation of the physical or material objects generated by those societies. The source material for study is exceptionally wide, including not just human-made artifacts, but also natural objects and even preserved body parts, as you saw in the film Encountering a Body. Some specialists in the field of material culture have made bold claims for its preeminence. In certain disciplines, it reigns supreme. It plays a critical role in archaeology, for example, especially in circumstances where written evidence is either patchy or non-existent. In such cases, objects are all scholars have to rely on in forming an understanding of ancient peoples. Even where written documents survive, the physical remains of literate cultures often help to provide new and interesting insights into how people once lived and thought, as in the case of medieval and post-medieval archaeology. In analyzing the physical remains of societies, both past and present, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and others have been careful to remind us that objects mean different things to different people.
From the time of the very earliest civilizations, man has wondered about the world he lives in, about how it was created, and about how it will end. In these distant times, the sun was seen to make its daily journey across the sky. At night, the moon appeared. Every new night, the moon waxed or waned a little, and on a few nights, it did not appear at all. At night, the great dome of the heavens was dotted with tiny specks of light. They became known as the stars. It was thought that every star in the heavens had its own purpose, and that the secrets of the universe could be discovered by making a study of them. It was well known that there were wandering stars. They appeared in different nightly positions against their neighbors, and they became known as planets. It took centuries, in fact, it took millennia, for man to determine the true nature of these wandering stars and to evolve a model of the world to accommodate them and to predict their positions in the sky. In the fast-changing world of modern healthcare, the job of a doctor is more like the job of chief executive. The people who run hospitals and physicians' practices don't just need to know medicine. They must also be able to balance budgets, motivate a large and diverse staff, and make difficult marketing and legal decisions.
More than simply putting flowers in a container, Ikebana is a disciplined art form in which nature and humanity are brought together. Contrary to the idea of a particolored or multicolored arrangement of blossoms, Ikebana often emphasizes other areas of the plant, such as its stems and leaves, and puts emphasis on shape, line, and form. Though Ikebana is an expression of creativity, certain rules govern its form. The artist's intention is shown through a piece's color combinations, natural shapes, graceful lines, and the implied meaning of the arrangement.
London's National Portrait Gallery is currently celebrating the 50-year career of photographer Sandra Luzada. The 21 portraits on display depict key figures in literature, film, and fashion from the early 1960s. Subsequent to the acquisition of 40 portraits by Luzada, the display at the National Portrait Gallery highlights shots taken between 1960 and 1964, many of which feature in Luzada's book Public Faces, Private Places, 2008. Formal commission portraits are shown alongside behind-the-scenes photographs taken on film sets and unguarded portraits of sitters captured at home.
Even after thousands of years exploring Earth, we're still uncovering new things like an ancient superhighway in the Guatemalan rainforest. Hidden beneath a thick layer of vegetation, the network of roads stretches over 150 miles and was most likely built by the Mayan Empire some 2,000 years ago. The newly mapped roads are connected to the ruins of El Mirador, sometimes called the Khan Kingdom, in northern Guatemala. Archaeologists believe El Mirador was founded around the 6th century BCE and was at its most powerful around the early 1st century CE. At that time, it had a population of as many as 250,000, a quarter the size of Rome itself at the time. It also has some of the largest pyramids in the world. It was the heart of the Mayan civilization and naturally needed some major roadways. The roads of El Mirador have been known about since 1967, but scientists had no idea how extensive they were until now. The thick jungle obscured the remnants of the road, making it difficult to see from the air.
The Australian Renewable Energy Agency, ARENA, has awarded $2.49 million to cover a portion of the cost of a collaborative project led by the Australian Maritime College at the University of Tasmania, in partnership with the University of Queensland and CSIRO. The $5.85 million Tidal Energy in Australia Assessing Resource and Feasibility to Australia's Future Energy Mix project will map the country's tidal energy in unprecedented detail before assessing its ability to contribute to Australia's energy needs.
What killed off the dinosaurs? The end of the Cretaceous period saw one of the most dramatic mass extinctions the Earth has ever seen. The fossil record shows that throughout their 160 million year existence, dinosaurs took on a huge variety of forms as the environment changed and new species evolved that were suited to these new conditions. Others that failed to adapt went extinct. But then, 66 million years ago, over a relatively short time, dinosaurs disappeared, completely, except for birds. Many other animals also died out, including pterosaurs, large marine reptiles, and other sea creatures such as ammonites. Although the number of dinosaur species was already declining, this suggests a sudden catastrophic event sealed their fate, causing unfavorable changes to the environment more quickly than dinosaurs and other creatures could adapt. The exact nature of this catastrophic event is still open to scientific debate. The catastrophe could have been an asteroid impact, volcanic eruptions, or the effect of both, together with more gradual changes in the Earth's climate over millions of years. Whatever the causes, the huge extinction that ended the age of the dinosaur left gaps in the ecosystem that were subsequently filled by mammals and birds, allowing them to evolve rapidly.
Willful blindness had started life as a legal concept in the 19th century. A judge in Regina versus Sleep ruled that an accused could not be convicted for possession of government property unless the jury found that he either knew the goods came from government stores or had willfully shut his eyes to the fact. Thereafter, English judicial authorities referred to the state of mind that accompanied one who willfully shut his eyes as connivance or constructive knowledge. Over time, lots of other phrases came into play. Deliberate or willful ignorance, conscious avoidance, and deliberate indifference. What they all have in common is the idea that there is an opportunity for knowledge and a responsibility to be informed, but it is shirked. Nowadays, the law is most often applied in cases of money laundering and drug trafficking. If you've been paid a large amount of money to carry a suitcase, then you are being willfully blind if you don't check what is inside.
Governments also frequently subsidize local industries to help them compete in the global market. Subsidies come in the form of tax credits or direct payments. The most commonly used are farm subsidies. That allows producers to lower the price of local goods and services. This makes the products cheaper, even when shipped overseas. Subsidies work even better than tariffs. This method works best for countries that rely mainly on exports. On the contrary, sometimes subsidies can have the opposite effect. The Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 allowed the government to pay farmers, not to grow crops or livestock, which let their fields rest and regain nutrients. It helped the agriculture industry, but raised food costs during the Depression.
Victorians were avid readers. Just as we bury our faces in our mobile devices on the morning commute, so too did Victorians with the latest penny fiction. Perhaps the best known serialized novels were the Penny Dreadfuls. Costing just one old penny, they focused on the exploits of detectives, criminals, or supernatural entities. The price of new books, often only available as a set of 3, was out of reach for most working-class people, so they borrowed from circulating libraries, such as Moody's, founded 1842, which dispatched books all over Britain for a modest, could afford first editions, reading from their own subscription fee. For the wealthier classes whose collection would be an everyday occurrence. Emerging in the mid-1950s in Britain and late 1950s in America, pop art reached its peak in the 1960s. It began as a revolt against the dominant approaches to art and culture and traditional views on what art should be. Young artists felt that what they were taught at art school and what they saw in museums did not have anything to do with their lives or the things they saw around them every day. Instead, they turned to sources such as Hollywood movies, advertising, product packaging, pop music, and comic books for their imagery.
In the UK, it is recommended that drivers should turn off their car engines when they expect to be stationary for more than 1 minute. To encourage drivers to turn off their engines while waiting at rail crossings, the Kent City Council placed a permanent sign at the crossing, asking drivers to please switch off your engine when barriers are down to help improve air quality. On average, drivers had to wait between 2 and 3 minutes to cross after the barrier had gone down. However, the sign didn't seem to be convincing the majority of drivers to switch off their engines. Although some research suggests that signs alone can change behavior, the message on this sign was designed simply to be an informational request and was not guided by any particular behavioral theory, the researchers explain. So the research team, led by Rose Melody of the University of East Anglia, designed an intervention study.
Early humans were hunter-gatherers, roaming from place to place, but their movements were controlled by the need for water. When humans started to grow food and established permanent settlements, Water was needed for crops and animals, as well as for people, so settlements have always grown up near reliable sources of water. Most major towns lie on the banks of rivers, or where there are no streams or rivers, settlements exist where underground water can be reached by digging wells. The management of water resources has a long history. The oldest known dam in the world was constructed in Egypt about 5,000 years ago and was used for storing drinking and irrigation water. Farmers in Arabia at this time used the craters of extinct volcanoes as storage tanks for irrigation water and dug deep wells for their drinking water. Excavated ruins in India of similar antiquity retain the remains of water supply and drainage systems, which included baths and swimming pools.
Everyone who goes to college knows how important it is to get along with a roommate. Well, at least they know how important it is after they have tried it. When I first went to college, I hadn't given it much thought, until I was introduced to Martin, that is. It's not that Martin was some terrible monster or anything, just that we were, well, incompatible. The actual sharing of the space didn't present much of a problem. He had his side and I had mine. That worked very well. No, the problem was more to do with sharing time. Martin, you see, was a night owl, and I am not. So, when at midnight I was tucked up in bed with a book, Martin was just getting started. And when at 3 in the morning his friends were still coming round to pay a social visit, my smile was wearing thin. Despite all this, Martin and I remained firm friends throughout college. Surprised? Okay, perhaps our friendship was helped along a little by the fact that we were able to swap roommates after our first week.
Do you really want to leave your laptop on your bedside table? Can you see yourself logging off, switching off, and unplugging before you turn off your light? Many people are saying that this is precisely what we will all be doing in a few years' time. They are prophesying the demise of the book. A new lease of life for the rainforests, they say, another coup for technology. Time marches on. Don't look back. Good news for opticians, I say, as our eyesight deteriorates rapidly because of constant staring at a computer screen. Computers are part of most people's work now, but they have not been around long enough for experts to say just what long-term effect they will have on our eyes. Myself, I don't think there's much doubt. Anyway, I don't believe any of it. No need for Gutenberg, the inventor of printing, to turn in his grave yet.
Some 66 million years ago, a meteor crashed into the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, marking the end of the age of dinosaurs. It was a mass extinction event, and it was devastating. A mass extinction is a short period of geological time in which a high percentage of biodiversity or distinct species dies out. Unlike previous extinction events that were caused by natural phenomena, the sixth mass extinction is driven by human activity. The biggest driver of destruction is how we use the land and the sea. This includes the conversion of land cover, such as forests and other natural habitats, for agricultural and urban use. And agricultural expansion is the main driver behind deforestation, with animal farming being a particular driver of forest degradation and forest biodiversity loss. The natural world is also affected by the climate crisis. Species and ecosystems around the world, especially the most vulnerable ones, are affected by the rise of greenhouse gas emissions. Mankind's emissions of greenhouse gases are warming up the atmosphere and, subsequently, everything on Earth.
An important corollary of this focus on language as the window to legal epistemology is the central role of discourse to law and other socio-cultural processes. In particular, the ideas that people hold about how language works combine with linguistic structuring to create powerful, often unconscious effects. In recent years, linguistic anthropologists have made much progress in developing more precisely analytic tools for tracking those effects.
Spanish is spoken by more than 300 million people in over 20 countries and is rapidly becoming one of the most popular choices for language learners around the world. A popular course for beginners, Suenos World Spanish is designed to meet the varied needs of adult learners, whether learning at home or in a class. From the very beginning, it encourages you to develop your listening and speaking skills with confidence and provides many opportunities to practice reading in Spanish. Using the extensive range of media available, from the course book to the audio CDs or cassettes, to the popular accompanying television series and free online activities, Suenos World Spanish can help you reach the equivalent level of a first qualification such as GCSE.
The logic of the scientific method was set out by John Stuart Mill in 1843 and was named the method of difference. A simple example of what he meant by this is to take two glasses of water which are identical in every respect. Introduce a few drops of ink into one of these glasses. The water changes color. According to Mill's method of difference, it is safe to assume that the change in the color of the water is due to the introduction of a new factor, the independent variable, in this case, the ink.
Over the past 2 decades, around a third of the world's mangrove swamps have been converted for human use, with many turned into valuable shrimp farms. In 2007, an economic study of such shrimp farms in Thailand showed that the commercial profits per hectare were $9,632. If that were the only factor, conversion would seem an excellent idea. However, proper accounting shows that for each hectare government subsidies formed $8,412 of this figure. And there were costs too, $1,000 for pollution and $12,392 for losses to ecosystem services. These comprised damage to the supply of foods and medicines that people had taken from the forest, the loss of habitats for fish, and less buffering against storms. And because a given shrimp farm only stays productive for 3 or 4 years, there was the additional cost of restoring them afterwards. If you do so with mangroves themselves, add another $9,318 per hectare. The overall year lesson is that what looks beneficial only does so because the profits are retained by the private sector, while the problems are spread out across society at large, appearing on no specific balance sheet.
Team Lab's digital mural at the entrance to Tokyo's Skytree, one of the world's monster skyscrapers, is 40 meters long and immensely detailed. However massive this form of digital art becomes, and it's a form subject to rampant inflation, Inoko's theories about seeing are based on more modest and often pre-digital sources. An early devotee of comic books and cartoons, no surprises there, then computer games, he recognized when he started to look at traditional Japanese art that all those forms had something in common, something about the way they captured space. In his discipline of physics, Inoko had been taught that photographic lenses, along with the conventions of Western art, were the logical way of transforming 3 dimensions into 2, conveying the real world onto a flat surface. But Japanese traditions employed a different spatial logic, as he said in an interview last year with j-collabo.org, that is uniquely Japanese.
Thanks to their ability to hijack our most primal desires for connection, distraction, and validation, smartphones have become some of the best-selling devices of all time. Apple have sold more than 1 billion iPhones since its launch in 2007. By one estimate, we spend an average of almost 5 hours a day staring at their little screens. The real figure is probably higher. A team of British psychologists found that people tend to underestimate the time spent on their phones by about half, whole hours just evaporating in the fog.
First, the scientific community that studies climate change is quietly panic-stricken because things are moving much faster than they expected. Greenhouse gas emissions are going up faster than predicted, both from industrializing countries in Asia and from melting permafrost in Siberia and Canada. The Arctic sea ice is melting so fast that the whole ocean may be ice-free in late summer in 5 years' time. Most climate scientists now see last year's report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose forecasts are used by most governments for planning purposes, as a purely historical document. Second, the biggest early impact of global warming will be on the food supply, both locally and globally. When the global average temperature hits 1.5 degrees hotter, and it will, the carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere commits us to that much warming. Some countries will no longer be able to feed their people. Others, further from the equator, will still have enough food for themselves, but none to spare.
The speed of sound, otherwise known as Mach 1, varies with temperature. At sea level on a standard day, the temperature is 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and Mach 1 is approximately 761 mph. As the altitude increases, the temperature and speed of sound both decrease until about 36,000 feet, after which the temperature remains steady until about 60,000 feet. Within that 36,000 to 60,000 feet range, Mach 1 is about 661 miles per hour. Because of the variation, it is possible for an airplane flying supersonic at high altitude to be slower than a subsonic flight at sea level. The transonic band, the sound barrier, extends from around Mach 0.8, when the first supersonic shock waves form on the wing, to Mach 1.2, when the entire wing has gone supersonic.
Dance has played an important role in many musicals. In some cases, dance numbers are included as an excuse to add to the color and spectacle of the show, but dance is more effective when it forms an integral part of the plot. An early example is Richard Rodgers' On Your Toes, 1936, in which the story about classical ballet meeting the world of jazz enabled dance to be introduced in a way that enhances rather than interrupts the drama.
Catherine Muse does not meet bohemian hippie parents in her line of work. Typically one or both of the parents she sees work in the City of London. Professionals seek professionals, she says. Originally a nanny, Muse is now a parenting consultant, advising couples privately on changing their child's behavior, as well as doing corporate seminars for working parents. Her clients find they are unprepared for the chaos and unpredictability that having a child can entail. Parents are getting older. They have been in control their whole lives and been successful. Suddenly a baby turns up and life turns on its head. Nicknamed the 3-day nanny, because of her pledge to fix behavioral problems in children under the age of 12 within 3 days, she is filming a new Channel 4 television series demonstrating her techniques. The role of the parenting consultant, distinct from that of a nanny, has developed, she says, as people are used to buying in expertise, such as personal trainers or, in her case, parenting advice.
The widespread use of artificial light in modern societies means that light pollution is an increasingly common feature of the environments humans inhabit. This type of pollution is exceptionally high in coastal regions of tropic and temperate zones, as these are areas of high rates of human population growth and settlement. Light pollution is a threat for many species that inhabit these locations. particularly those whose ecology or behavior depends, in some way, on natural cycles of light and dark. Artificial light is known to have detrimental effects on the ecology of sea turtles, particularly at the hatchling stage when they emerge from nests on natal beaches and head towards the sea. Under natural conditions, turtles hatch predominantly at night, although some early morning and late afternoon emergence occurs, and show an innate and well-directed orientation to the water, relying mostly on light cues that attract them toward the brighter horizon above the sea surface. Artificial lighting on beaches is strongly attractive to hatchlings and can cause them to move away from the sea and interfere with their ability to orient in a constant direction. Ultimately, this disorientation due to light pollution can lead to death of hatchlings from exhaustion, dehydration, and predation.
Bhutan used to be one of the most isolated nations in the world. Developments, including direct international flights, the internet, mobile phone networks, and cable television, have increasingly modernized the urban areas of the country. Bhutan has balanced modernization with its ancient culture and traditions under the guiding philosophy of gross national happiness, GNH. Rampant destruction of the environment has been avoided. The government takes great measures to preserve the nation's traditional culture, identity, and the environment. In 2006, Businessweek magazine rated Bhutan the happiest country in Asia and the 8th happiest in the world, citing a global survey conducted by the University of Leicester in 2006 called The World Map of Happiness.
Crime prevention has a long history in Australia and in other parts of the world. In all societies, people have tried to protect themselves and those close to them from assaults and other abuses. Every time someone locks the door to their house or their car, they practice in a form of prevention. Most parents want their children to learn to be law-abiding and not spend extended periods of their lives in prison. In this country, at least, most succeed. Only a small minority of young people become recidivist offenders. In a functioning society, crime prevention is part of everyday life. While prevention can be all-pervasive at the grassroots, it is oddly neglected in mass media and political discourses. When politicians, talkback radio hosts, and newspaper editorialists pontificate about crime and possible remedies, it is comparatively rare for them to mention prevention. Overwhelmingly, emphasis is on policing, sentencing, and other law and order responses.
Cultural studies is a new way of engaging in the study of culture. In the past, many academic subjects including anthropology, history, literary studies, human geography, and sociology have brought their own disciplinary concerns to the study of culture. However, in recent decades there has been a renewed interest in the study of culture that has crossed disciplinary boundaries. The resulting activities and cultural studies have emerged as an intriguing and exciting area of intellectual inquiry that has already shed important new life on the character of human cultures and which promises to continue to do so. While there is a little doubt that cultural studies are coming to be widely recognized as an important and distinctive field of study, it does seem to encompass a potentially enormous area. This is because the term culture has a complex history and range of usages, which have provided a legitimate focus of inquiry for several academic disciplines.
SM lakes with a surface area of less than 100 square meters represent the majority of global freshwater ecosystems. Many of these lakes are found in remote, often mountainous areas with no inflow and outflow. Yet in most of these lakes there are fish. So, how do fish reach lakes and ponds that are not connected to other bodies of water? This question was already addressed by some of the leading natural scientists of the 19th century, such as Charles Darwin, Alfred Russel Wallace, and Charles Lyell. who all came to the same conclusion. Water birds must be responsible for fish dispersal, and they had a plausible explanation for this. Fish eggs of some species are sticky and can survive for some time out of water. The theory is thus that the fish eggs stick to water birds' feathers or feet. The birds then fly from one body of water to the next, where the fish hatch from their eggs.
It is an original work, not an excerpted passage. An abstract must be fully self-contained and make sense by itself, without further reference to outside sources or to the actual paper. It highlights key content areas, your research purpose, the relevance or importance of your work, and the main outcomes. It is a well-developed single paragraph of approximately 250 words in length, which is indented and single-spaced. The function of the abstract is to outline briefly all parts of the paper. Although it is placed at the beginning of your paper, immediately following the title page, the abstract should be the last thing that you write, once you are sure of the conclusions you will reach. Uniquely stable, they seem to participate in no chemical reactions. But by understanding the stability of the noble gases, physicists discovered the key to chemical bonding itself. Dmitry Mendeleev added the noble gases to his periodic table in 1902, where he arranged the elements in rows and columns according to their atomic weight. Mendeleev was able to see repeating or periodic patterns in their properties. The noble gases appeared regularly in the periodic table, occurring in every eighth position, at least amongst the lighter elements.
One of the Supreme Court's most important responsibilities is to decide cases that raise questions of constitutional interpretation. The court decides if a law or government action violates the Constitution. This is known as judicial review and enables the court to invalidate both federal and state laws when they conflict with the Constitution. Since the Supreme Court stands as the ultimate authority in constitutional interpretation, its decisions can be changed only by another Supreme Court decision or by a constitutional amendment.
Psychology as a subject of study has largely developed in the West since the late 19th century. During this period there has been an emphasis on scientific thinking. Because of this emphasis, there have been many scientific studies in psychology which explore different aspects of human nature. These include studies into how biology, physical factors influence human experience, how people use their senses, touch, taste, smell, sight and hearing, to get to know the world, how people develop, why people behave in certain ways, how memory works, how people develop language, how people understand and think about the world, what motivates people, why people have emotions and how personality develops. These scientific investigations all contribute to an understanding of human nature. This means that people who have knowledge of psychology can use or apply that knowledge in areas such as the ones listed above.
Plants serve as the conduit of energy into the biosphere, provide food and materials used by humans, and they shape our environment. According to Earhart and Frommer, the three major challenges facing humanity in our time are food, energy, and environmental degradation. All three are plant-related. All of our food is produced by plants, either directly or indirectly via animals that eat them. Plants are a source of energy production, and they are intimately involved in climate change and a major factor in a variety of environmental concerns, including agricultural expansion and its impact on habitat destruction and waterway pollution. What's more, none of these issues is independent of each other. Climate change places additional stresses on the food supply and on various habitats. So plant research is instrumental in addressing all of these problems and moving into the future. For plant research to move significantly forward, Earhart and Former say technological development is critical, both to test existing hypotheses and to gain new information and generate fresh hypotheses. If we are to make headway in understanding how these essential organisms function and build the foundation for a sustainable future, then we need to apply the most advanced technologies available to the study of plant life, they say.
When humans began farming some 12,000 years ago, they altered the future of our species forever. Our ancestors were ecological pioneers, discovering and cultivating the most valuable crops, scaling them up to feed entire communities, and transforming wild crops so fundamentally that they became dependent on humans for their survival. Farming, in the words of National Geographic's Genographic Project, sowed the seeds for the modern phage.
In The Origin of Species, Darwin provided abundant evidence that life on Earth has evolved over time, and he proposed natural selection as the primary mechanism for that change. He observed that individuals differ in their inherited traits and that selection acts on such differences, leading to evolutionary change. Although Darwin realized that variation in heritable traits is a prerequisite for evolution, he did not know precisely how organisms pass heritable traits to their offspring. Just a few years after Darwin published The Origin of Species, Gregory Mendel wrote a groundbreaking paper on inheritance in pea plants. In that paper, Mendel proposed a model of inheritance in which organisms transmit discrete heritable units, now called genes, to their offspring. Although Darwin did not know about genes, Mendel's paper set the stage for understanding the genetic differences on which evolution is based.
The Edo Tokyo Tate Mano-en is an open-air architectural museum but could be better thought of as a park. 30 buildings from the 19th and early 20th centuries from all around Tokyo were restored and relocated to the space where they can be explored by future generations to come. The buildings are a collection of houses and businesses, shops and bathhouses, all of which would have been present on a typical middle-class street from Urawa to Showa-ura, Tokyo. The west section is residential, with traditional thatched roof bungalows of the 19th century. Meiji-era houses are also on view, constructed in a more Western style after Japan opened its borders in 1868. The Musashino Sabo Cafe occupies the ground floor of one such house, where visitors can enjoy a cup of tea. Grand residences like that of Kurikyo Takahashi, an early 20th century politician assassinated over his controversial policies, demonstrate how the upper class lived during that time period. The east section is primarily businesses from the 1920s and 30s, preserved with their wares on display. Visitors are free to wander through a kitchenware shop, a florist's, an umbrella store, a bar, a soy sauce shop, a tailor's, a cosmetics shop, and an inn complete with an operational noodle shop.
Academic writing addresses complex issues that require high-order thinking skills to comprehend. Critical, reflective, logical, and creative thinking. Think of your writing this way. One of the most important attributes of a good teacher is the ability to explain complex ideas in a way that is understandable and relatable to the topic being presented. This is also one of the main functions of academic writing, describing and explaining the significance of complex ideas as clearly as possible. Often referred to as higher order thinking skills, these include cognitive processes that are used to comprehend, solve problems, and express concepts or that describe abstract ideas that cannot be easily acted out, pointed to, or shown with images. As a writer, you must take in the role of a good teacher by summarizing a lot of complex information into a well-organized synthesis of ideas, concepts, and recommendations that contribute to a better understanding of the research problem.
There comes a time in a desert ant's life when a piece of food is too large to ignore but too heavy to lift, and the only way to get it home is to adopt a new style of walking. The long-legged and speedy Cataglyphis fortis normally covers ground with a three-legged stride that moves two legs forwards on one side and one on the other. For the next step, the insect mirrors the move with its other three legs. But recordings of ants in the Tunisian desert reveal that when faced with oversized lumps of food 10 times their own weight, the forward tripod walking style is abandoned. Unable to lift the morsels in their mandibles, the ants drag the food backwards instead, moving all 6 legs independently. This is the first time we have seen this in any ants, said lead author Sarah Pfeffer at the University of Ulm in Germany. The ants' long legs already help keep their bodies away from the scorching desert floor and enable them to speed around at up to 60 centimeters per second. The researchers, who published the findings on ant locomotion and navigation in the Journal of Experimental Biology, believe that robotics will be one of the first technologies to benefit from the discovery.
The modern research ship takes its origins from the early exploration voyages such as HMS Endeavour and HMS Challenger, both of which were converted vessels, fitted with a range of research facilities to sample and measure across a range of disciplines in extreme environments. Early research vessels were fairly basic and simplistic compared to the state-of-the-art ships we see being developed today. Gradually, the trend of converting other vessels into research ships was challenged by the challenging demands of investigating increasingly complex areas of oceanographic research, such as physical, biological, and chemical oceanography, marine geology and geophysics, ocean engineering and atmospheric science in one expedition. In order to carry out multidisciplinary research in extreme environments, specially designed research vessels became a requirement. Research ships are the primary source of oceanographic observations, and will remain so for the foreseeable future. As time goes on, science is likely to be conducted in increasingly remote and environmentally challenging areas, including the polar seas. So the ability to operate with minimal interruptions from the natural elements remains unchanged from the days of the Challenger expedition. Interior design is a professionally conducted, practice-based process of planning and realization of interior spaces and the elements within. Interior design is concerned with the function and operation of the aesthetics and its sustainability. The work of an interior designer draws upon many other disciplines, such as environmental psychology, architecture, product design, and aesthetics, in relation to a wide range of building spaces, including hotels, corporate and public spaces, schools, hospitals, private residences, shopping malls, restaurants, theaters, and airport terminals.
Research has suggested that major stresses in our lives are life changes, for example, moving house, marriage, or relationship breakdown. Work-related factors, including unemployment and boredom, are also common causes of stress. Differences in personality may also play a part. A stress reaction is a response to a perceived threat. Different people perceive things in different ways, so a situation that one person finds very stressful might not be to someone else.
New favorable traits evolve when genetic mutations arise that offer a survival edge. As the survivors of each generation pass on those beneficial mutations, the mutations and their adaptive traits become more common in the general population. Though it may take millions of years for complex traits to evolve, say allowing humans to walk on 2 legs, evolution itself happens with each generation as adaptive mutations become more frequent in the population. The genomic revolution has allowed biologists to see the natural selection process in action by making the genetic blueprint of hundreds of thousands of people available for comparison. By tracking the relative rise and fall of specific mutations across generations of people, researchers can infer which traits are spreading or dwindling.
It would be reassuring to think that the electorate choose who to vote for based on the candidates' track records and future policy promises. In truth, many of us are swayed simply by the way that politicians look. Consider a 2009 study that asked Swiss students to look at multiple pairs of unfamiliar French political candidates, and in each case, to select the one who looked most competent. Most of the time, the candidate selected by students as looking the most competent was also the one who'd had real-life electoral success, the implication being that voters too had been swayed by the candidate's appearance. There's little evidence that appearance and competence actually correlate. Unsurprisingly, being attractive also helps win votes, especially in wartime. In peacetime, looking trustworthy is more of an advantage. Other research has shown that we're more likely to vote for male and female candidates with deeper voices.
Affordable early years education and childcare potentially enables parents, particularly mothers, to be in paid employment. International studies have found that countries with greater enrollment rates in publicly funded or provided childcare also have higher maternal employment rates, although untangling causal relationships is complex. From the point of view of the household, additional income, especially for the less well-off, is itself associated with better outcomes for children, as child poverty has been shown to be a key independent determinant of children's outcomes. From the point of view of the public purse, as mothers enter employment, they are likely to claim fewer benefits and to generate extra revenues through income tax.
Some students say that they need complete quiet to read and study. Others study best in a crowded, noisy room because the noise actually helps them concentrate. Some students like quiet music playing, others do not. The point is, you should know the level of noise that is optimal for your own studying. However, one general rule for all students is that the television seems to be more of a distraction than music or other background noise, so leave the TV off when you're reading or studying. Also, don't let yourself become distracted by computer games, email, or internet surfing.
Buying a house can seem like a daunting process. First, you need to work out how much you can borrow. This is where our services will really help you. Make sure you have an accurate and detailed budget that takes into account all associated with purchasing a property, including stamp duty, council rates, and other fees. We can help you identify these extra costs. Ask us for our budget planner if you don't already have one. Interest rates move constantly, so you will need to allow room in your budget for interest rate increases and for other unforeseen events. All purchase funds are paid at settlement. In the ordinary course of events, settlement takes place. The purchase price is paid in full, and the deposit bond simply lapses into group certificates for the past 2 years.
Clones of an eastern cottonwood, populous deltoids in the Bronx and other city spots grew to double the biomass of clones. Planted outside SM All Towns upstate or on Long Island, says Jillian Gregg, now of the Environmental Protection Agency's Western Ecology Division in Corvallis, Oregon. The growth gap comes from ozone damage, she and her New York colleagues report. Ozone chemists have known that concentrations may spike skyscraper high in city air, but during a full 24 hours, rural trees actually get a higher cumulative ozone exposure from urban pollution that blows in and lingers. A series of new experiments now shows that this hang-around ozone is the overwhelming factor in tree growth, the researchers say in the July 10th Nature. This study has profound importance in showing us most vividly that rural areas pay the price for urban pollution, says Stephen P. Long of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. This work should be a wake-up call, he adds.
Assessments of language learning in 18-month-olds suggest that children are better at grasping the names of objects with repeated syllables over words with non-identical syllables. Researchers say the study may help explain why some words or phrases, such as train and good night, have given rise to versions with repeated syllables, such as choo-choo and night-night. The researchers say such words are easier for infants to learn and may provide them with a starter point for vocabulary learning. A team from the University of Edinburgh assessed the infant's language learning behavior in a series of visual and attention tests, using pictures on a computer screen of two unfamiliar objects. The two objects were named with made-up words which were communicated to the infants by a recorded voice, one with two identical syllables, for example, nine, and the other without repeated syllables, such as ballet. The infants were then tested for their recognition of each word. Recordings of their eye movements showed they looked more reliably at the object labeled with repeated syllables than the other object. Researchers validated their results with a control test, in which the infants responded to pictures of familiar objects, such as a dog or an apple.
We now know through the work of neuroscientists that the human brain is wired to mimic other people, and this mimicry involves actual involuntary physiological experience in the observer. Human beings tend to imitate actions that they see. Physiologically, our brains include mirror neurons, which react to actions that are seen as if we are doing the action ourselves. It is largely an unconscious and automatic experience. When we hear people speak, observe their vocal nuances, watch their posture, gestures, and facial expressions, etc. Neural networks in our brains are stimulated by the shared representations generating feelings within us that reflect the experience of those we are observing.
Mischel is the creator of the marshmallow test, one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology, which is often cited as evidence of the importance of self-control. In the original test, which was administered at the Bing Nursery School at Stanford in the 1960s, Mischel's team would present a child with a treat. Marshmallows were just one option, and tell her that she could either eat the one treat immediately or wait alone in the room for several minutes until the researcher returned, at which point she could have two treats. The promised treats were always visible, and the child knew that all she had to do to stop the agonizing wait was ring a bell to see all the experimenter back, although in that case, she wouldn't get the second treat. The longer a child delayed gratification, Mischel found, that is, the longer she was able to wait, the better she would fare later in life at numerous measures of what we now see all executive function. She would perform better academically, earn more money, and be healthier and happier. She would also be more likely to avoid a number of negative outcomes, including jail time, obesity, and drug use.
No matter whether you speak English or Urdu, Walloon or Waziri, Portuguese or Persian, the roots of your language are the same. Proto-Indo-European, PIE, is the mother tongue, shared by several hundred contemporary languages, as well as many now extinct and spoken by people who lived from about 6,000 to 3,500 BC on the steppes to the north of the Caspian Sea. They left no written texts, and although historical linguists have, since the 19th century, painstakingly reconstructed the language from daughter languages, the question of how it actually sounded was assumed to be permanently out of reach. Now, researchers at the universities of Cambridge and Oxford have developed a sound-based method to move back through the family tree of languages that stem from Pi. They can simulate how certain words would have sounded when they were spoken 8,000 years ago. Remarkably, at the heart of the technology is the statistics of shape. Sounds have shape, explains Professor John Aston from Cambridge's Statistical Laboratory. As a word is uttered, it vibrates air, and the shape of this sound wave can be measured and turned into a series of numbers. Once we have these stats and the stats of another spoken word, we can start asking how similar they are and what it would take to shift from one to another.
People in parts of Western Africa and Southwestern Asia were the first to realize that the dark silvery rocks poking out of the earth could be worked into tools and weapons sometime around 1500 BC, evidence shows. The metal was probably discovered there by accident when some ore was dropped into a fire and cooled into wrought iron, historians think. The Eureka moment didn't reach Europe for another 500 years, traveling slowly north and west through Greece, Italy, Central Europe, and finally to the British Isles. With the spread of the famous Celtic tribes, the Celts diffused iron technology over much of the continent through warfare, where their victory was assured due to the strength of iron weapons. Perhaps not the most peaceful of cultural exchanges, but where the technology did travel, it caught on fast. Iron made life a lot easier in those days, when just living to the age of 45 was a feat by that time. Much of Europe had settled into small village life, toiling the soil with bronze and stone tools. Iron farming tools, such as sickles and plow tips, made the process more efficient and allowed farmers to exploit tougher soils, try new crops, and have more time for other activities. Contexts is a quarterly magazine of the American Sociological Association about society and social behavior. Directed to anyone interested in the latest sociological ideas and research, Context seeks to apply new knowledge, stimulate fresh thinking, and disseminate important information produced by the discipline. The publication's articles synthesize key findings, weave together diverse strands of work, draw out implications for policy, and debate issues of controversy. The hallmarks of Contexts are accessibility, broad appeal, and timeliness. By design, it is not a technical journal, but a magazine for diverse readers who wish to be current about social science knowledge, emerging trends, and their relevance. The universality of story feature films are narratives. They tell stories. Even films based on true events will fictionalize them in order to produce drama, to telescope time, to avoid being filled up with too many minor characters, or simply to be more entertaining. Even in the current welter of special effect movies, feature films are usually summarized by their plots, in their first treatment, or outline of the script idea, in the advance publicity, in the TV guide, in reviews, and in conversations. Films may differ from other kinds of narrative, literary fiction or television drama, for instance, in the medium used and the representational conventions. They do, however, share with literary fiction and television drama the basic structure and functions of narrative. Much work has been done by researchers in the field known as narratology on exactly what constitutes the structures and functions of the narrative. Their conclusions are of great use to students of the feature film.
Many tests have shown that, in a very broad way, people in most parts of the world have similar color preferences. Blue is the most preferred and popular hue, followed in order by red, green, purple, yellow, and orange. Overlaying this basic order of color preference, however, are the responses of individuals, which of course vary widely and may also be very powerful. Children are likely to have strong preferences for some colors and aversions to others, but sometimes will not admit to them, since outside factors may be influential in determining both color preferences and the way that they are expressed or suppressed. Current fashions in clothes and accessories, gender stereotyping, and peer group pressure may all play a significant part. Boys in particular may be reluctant to admit to any strong preferences for colors other than those of favorite football teams, because color awareness may be regarded by their peer group as feminine.
At the end of the colonial era, as many new nations gained independence, relative levels of economic development became an important criterion by which to distinguish between countries. The former colonial powers and wealthier parts of the world generally became known as advanced industrial or developed countries, while former colonies and poorer nations became known as less developed or more positively developing countries. Critics of the uneven distribution of wealth across the globe highlighted the role which wealth creation in some places had played in impoverishing poorer nations, and rather described them as actively underdeveloped. The question as to whether economic change is developing or underdeveloping countries remains a vital issue, as the debate over sweatshops highlights.
But look beyond fossil fuels for the most intriguing trends. One is that the energy intensity of the world economy, the amount of energy it takes to produce $1 worth of income, keeps falling at a rate of about 2%. What this means is that even without any change in the relative shares of fossil-based and fossil-free sources in the world's energy mix, we could have 2% annual economic growth without increasing carbon emissions from energy use. Of course, that is not enough to address climate change, and we need more economic growth than that. It is, nonetheless, a stunning number, which refutes the claim by some environmentalists that permanent economic growth is fundamentally incompatible with finite physical resources.
Paraphrasing is often defined as putting a passage from an author into your own words. However, what are your own words? How different must your paraphrase be from the original? The answer is, it should be considerably different. The whole point of paraphrasing is to show you have read and understood another person's ideas and can summarize them in your own writing style rather than borrowing their phrases. If you just change a few words or add some bits of your own to an otherwise reproduced passage, you will probably be penalized for plagiarism. You should aim to condense and simplify a writer's ideas and describe them using different sentence structures and expressions. It is also important to credit the original writer by referencing.
The stock of Australia's dwellings is evolving, with current homes having more bedrooms on average than homes 10 years ago. At the same time, households are getting smaller on average, with decreasing proportions of couple families with children and increasing couple-only and lone-person households. This article examines the changes in household size and number of bedrooms from 1994 to 95 to 2003 to 2004. Mechanical engineering was at the heart of Taylor's theorizing, providing the context for its development, the worldview by which it was sustained, and finally, the justification for its widespread application. Scientific management aimed to analyze and control the activities of people in the same way that engineers analyzed and controlled machines. Central to Taylor's system was the desire to rationalize and standardize production techniques in the interests of economy, efficiency, and mutual prosperity. His primary point of interest was the individual worker, pursuing individual goals and motivated by incentive payments. Undoubtedly, Taylor's view of human motivation was somewhat simplistic, and his apprehension of the significance of groups was limited and generally negative. The environmental impact of the global textile industry is hard to overstate. 1/3 of the water used worldwide is spent fashioning fabrics. For every ton of cloth produced, 200 tons of water is polluted with chemicals and heavy metals. An estimated 1 trillion kilowatt-hours of electricity powers the factories that card and comb, spin and weave, and cut and stitch materials into everything from t-shirts to towels, leaving behind mountains of solid waste and a massive carbon footprint. Where the industry is today is not really sustainable for the long term, says Shreyaska Chaudhry, chief executive of Pratibha Syntex, a textile manufacturer based outside Indore, India. With something of an "if you build it, they will come" attitude, Mr. Chaudhry has steered Pratibha toward the leading edge of eco-friendly textile production. Under his direction, Pratibha began making clothes with organic cotton in 1999. Initially, the company couldn't find enough organic farms growing cotton in central India to supply its factories. To meet production demands, Chaudhry's team had to convince conventional cotton farmers to change their growing methods. Pratibha provided seeds, cultivation instruction, and a guarantee of fair trade prices for their crops. Today, Pratibha has a network of 28,000 organic cotton growers across the central states of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Orissa.
Fancy locust for lunch? Probably not, if you live in the West, but elsewhere it's a different story. Edible insects, termites, stick insects, dragonflies, grasshoppers, and giant water bugs are on the menu for an estimated 80% of the world's population. More than 1,000 species of insects are served up around the world. For example, kungu cakes made from midges are a delicacy in parts of Africa. Mexico is an insect-eating or entomophagus hotspot, where more than 200 insect-eating or entomophagus hotspot, where more than 200 insect species are consumed. Demand is so high that 40 species are now under threat, including white agave worms. These caterpillars of the tequila giant skipper butterfly fetch around $250 a kilogram. Eating insects makes nutritional sense. Some contain more protein than meat or fish. The female gypsy moth, for instance, is about 80% protein. Insects can be a good source of vitamins and minerals too. A type of caterpillar, Eusta terpsichore, eaten in Angola, is rich in iron, zinc, and thiamine. What do they taste like? Ants have a lemon tang, apparently, whereas giant water bugs taste of mint and fire ant pupae of watermelon. You have probably inadvertently already tasted some of these things, as insects are often accidental tourists in other types of food. The US Food and Drug Administration even issues guidelines for the number of insect parts allowed in certain foods. For example, it is acceptable for 225 grams of macaroni to contain up to 225 insect fragments.
The general perception is that children are surrounded by a variety of musical experiences. There are often fewer and fewer opportunities for children to actively engage in music, making themselves. They are inundated with music emitting from a wide array of electronic devices, toys, and computers offering a limitless number of musical selections. However, much of the music in children's lives are unchosen. In other words, they are passive recipients in much of the music in their lives and not actively engaged in its selection. They experience background music in computer games, cartoons, TV shows, films, on iPads, radios, and ringtones. They listen to music choices of their parents or siblings, and even the schools they attend often play music before the school day begins or in classrooms, while students are working. Studies are being conducted on the effects of the ubiquitous pre-recorded music they encounter, and whether or not it on their desire to make their own music or interact with each other on the playground.
While workers worry about whether robots will take their jobs, teachers are wondering how to use education to insulate the next generation from such a fate. This has worked before. When the last wave of automation swept the developed world at the start of the 20th century, policymakers decided education was the answer. If machines were going to substitute for brawn, they reasoned, more people would need to use their brains. The US invested heavily in education, with good results. Workers reaped the benefits through better jobs and higher wages. Economists Andrew McAfee and Eric Brynjolfsson summed it up like this. The Industrial Revolution started a race between technology and education, and for most of the 20th century, humans won that race.
A music student at the University of Salford who wrote a song in 2 weeks is celebrating after being featured on a compilation album produced by Metropolis Studios. Pop megastars including Adele, Michael Jackson, and Sir Elton John have all recorded music at the world-famous Metropolis Studios. Last year, the recording studios set about compiling an album called Lost Songs, which features songs from relatively unknown musicians. First-year student Zach Taylor Frey decided to submit his song demo to be included in Volume 2 of the Lost Songs album, which was released this year after he saw how successful Volume 1 had been. Zach, 24, said, "I found this competition when simply searching the internet for songwriting competitions one day and was lucky that there was still time to enter. It amazes me that people who have worked with huge pop stars thought my song was good and worth something." Underground houses have many advantages over conventional housing. Unlike conventional homes, they can be built on steep surfaces and can maximize space in SM-all areas by going below the surface. In addition, the materials excavated in construction can be used in the building process. Underground houses have less surface area, so fewer building materials are used, and maintenance costs are lower. They are also wind, fire, and earthquake resistant, providing a secure and safe environment in extreme weather. One of the greatest benefits of underground living is energy efficiency. The Earth's subsurface temperature remains stable, so underground dwellings benefit from geothermal mass and heat exchange, staying cool in the summer and warm in the winter. This saves around 80% in energy costs. By incorporating solar design, this energy bill can be reduced to zero, providing hot water and heat to the home all year round.
Whether you want to exercise and stay healthy, train professionally with like-minded people, or indulge your competitive streak, Trinity Sport and Fitness have it covered. We've got a dedicated support development team on campus to support every student in taking part in sports. You might want to participate in sports competitions, volunteer with a local sports class, or simply play for fun with our social sport program. Trinity Fitness members of our public-facing sports facility will also entitle you to discounts when you are booking a sports facility and fitness class. You will also get an opportunity to benefit from tailored personal training, free activities events, and lots more.
A herbal is a book of plants describing their appearance, their properties, and how they may be used for preparing ointments and medicines. The medical use of plants is recorded on fragments of papyrus and clay tablets from ancient Egypt, Samaria, and China that date back 5,000 years, but document traditions far older still. Over 700 herbal remedies were detailed in the Papyrus Ebers, an Egyptian text written in 1500 BC. Around 65 BC, a Greek physician called Dioscorides wrote a herbal that was translated into Latin and Arabic, known as De Materia Medica. It became the most influential work on medicinal plants in both Christian and Islamic worlds until the late 17th century. An illustrated manuscript copy of the text made in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, survives from the 6th century. The first printed herbals date from the dawn of European printing in the 1480s. They provided valuable information for apothecaries, whose job it was to make the pills and potions prescribed by physicians. In the next century, landmark herbals were produced in England by William Turner, considered to be the father of British botany, and John Girard, whose illustrations would inspire the floral fabric, wallpaper and tile designs of William Morris 4 centuries later.
Drive down any highway and you'll see a proliferation of chain restaurants. Most likely if you travel long and far enough, you'll see McDonald's golden arches as well as signs for Burger King, Hardee's, and Wendy's, the Big Four of burgers. Despite its name, though, Burger King has fallen short of claiming the burger crown, unable to surpass market leader McDonald's #1 sales status. Always the bridesmaid and never the bride, Burger King remains #2. Worse yet, Burger King has experienced a 6-year 22% decline in customer traffic, with its overall quality rating dropping while ratings for the other three contenders have increased. The decline has been attributed to inconsistent product quality and poor customer service. Although the chain tends to throw advertising dollars at the problem, an understanding of integrated marketing communication theory would suggest that internal management problems, 19 CEOs in 50 years, need to be rectified before a unified, long-term strategy can be put in place. The importance of consistency in brand image and messages at all levels of communication has become a basic tenet of IMC theory and practice. The person who takes the customer's order must communicate the same message as Burger King's famous tagline, "Have it your way," or the customer will just buzz up the highway to a chain restaurant that seems more consistent and therefore more reliable.
Men and women are making different choices about their retirement savings, which could lead to very different investment outcomes, according to Dr. Claire Matthews, Director of Financial Planning at Massey University's Center for Banking Studies. Speaking at the 2012 New Zealand Finance Colloquium held at Massey University's Albany campus last week, Dr. Matthews said demographic characteristics had a substantial impact on the choices people made about KiwiSaver funds and retirement savings more generally. When it came to funding selection, she found there were significant differences based on gender. Men are more likely to invest in aggressive and growth funds, while women are more likely to choose conservative funds. Males are risk takers, whether it's in their choice of car or their investment fund, she says. But when it comes to long-term savings, risk-taking can actually be an advantage. Dr. Matthews also found that men are more likely than women to have prior savings when joining KiwiSaver. Just over half of male respondents said they had savings already, while only 38% of women did. These figures reflect and confirm, quite disappointingly, the difference between males and females and the level of interest they take in financial planning, Dr. Matthews says. It's important for all New Zealanders to be better educated about their personal finances, but this is particularly so for women. Other demographic factors, including age, ethnicity, education, and income, can also influence the choices being made about retirement savings. Dr. Matthews found that those with bachelor and higher degrees and those in households with a pre-tax income of $100,000 or more were more likely to choose aggressive and stimulating funds. On the other hand, both the youngest and oldest age groups were more likely to be invested in conservative funds. While this might be appropriate for the life cycle stage of older investors, it might not be so appropriate for younger, longer-term investors.
Crime is an integral part of everyday life. It is a prominent feature in the news and is a popular subject for fictional portrayal. Most students commencing legal studies will have some experience of crime, whether directly as a victim of a crime or indirectly through exposure to media coverage. This means that most offenses covered on the syllabus, such as murder, theft, and rape, will be familiar terms. This tends to give students the impression that they know more about criminal law than they do about other subjects on the syllabus. This can be a real disadvantage in terms of the academic study of criminal law because it tends to lead students to rely on preconceived notions of the nature and scope of the offenses and to reach instinctive, but often legally inaccurate, conclusions. It is absolutely essential to success in criminal law that you put aside any prior knowledge of the offenses and focus on the principles of law derived from statutes and cases. By doing this, you will soon appreciate just how much difference there is between everyday conceptions of crime and its actuality.
With about 1.5 billion non-native speakers, English has become the world's own language. Such dominance has its downside, of course. There are now about 6,800 languages left in the world, compared with perhaps twice that number back at the dawn of agriculture. Thanks in part to the rise of Uber languages, most importantly English, the remaining languages are now dying at the rate of about one a fortnight. Want to learn Busu, anyone? Then you'd better head to Cameroon fast before one of the language's last 8 speakers kicks the bucket, as the Busunese presumably doesn't say.
It is important to emphasize the need for hard work as an essential part of studying law, because far too many students are tempted to think that they can succeed by relying on what they imagine to be their natural ability, without bothering to add the expenditure of effort. To take an analogy, some people prefer the more or less instant gratification, which comes from watching television adaptation of a classic novel, to the rather more laborious process of reading the novel itself. Those who prefer watching television to reading the book are less likely to study law successfully unless they rapidly acquire a taste for text-based materials.
Traditionally, mass communications research has conceptualized the process of communication in terms of a circulation circuit or loop. This model has been criticized for its linearity, sender message/receiver, for its concentration on the level of message exchange and the absence of a structured conception of the different moments as a complex structure of relations. But it is also possible and useful to think of this process in terms of a structure produced and sustained through the articulation of linked but distinctive moments: production, circulation, distribution, for consumption, reproduction. This would be to think of the process as a complex structure and dominance, sustained through the articulation of connected practices, each of which, however, retains its distinctiveness and has its specific modality, its forms and conditions of existence. Daniel Harris, a scholar of consumption and style, has observed that until photography finally supplanted illustration as the primary means of advertising clothing in the 1950s, glamour inhered less in the face of the drawing, which was by necessity schematic and generalized, than in the sketch's attitude, posture, and gestures, especially in the strangely dainty positions of the hands. Glamour once resided so emphatically in the stance of the model that the faces in the illustrations cannot be said to have expressions at all, but angles or tilts, the chin raised upwards in a haughty look, the eyes lowered in an attitude of introspection, the head cocked at an inquisitive or coquettish angle, or the profile presented in sharp outline, emanating power the severity like an emperor's bust, embossed on a Roman coin.
Bones are extremely strong. One of their main functions is to protect organs. For example, the skull protects the brain, ribs protect the heart and lungs. There are 3 types of joints, including fixed joints, slightly movable joints, and freely moving joints. Financing of Australian higher education has undergone dramatic change since the early 1970s. Although the Australian government provided regular funding for universities from the late 1950s, in 1974, it assumed full responsibility for funding higher education, abolishing tuition fees to make the university accessible to all Australians who had the ability and who wished to participate in higher education. Since the late 1980s, there has been a move towards greater private contributions, particularly student fees. In 1989, the Australian government introduced the Higher Education Contribution Scheme, HECS, which included a loan scheme to help students finance their contributions. This enabled university to remain accessible to students by delaying their payments until they could afford to pay off their loans. In 2002, the Australian government introduced a scheme similar to HECS for postgraduate students, the Postgraduate Education Loan Scheme, PELS. Funding for higher education comes from various sources. This article examines the three main sources: Australian government funding, student fees and charges, and HECS. While the proportion of total revenue raised through HECS is relatively small, HECS payments are a significant component of students' university costs, with many students carrying a HECS debt for several years after leaving university. This article also focuses on the characteristics of university students based on their HECS liability status and the level of accumulated HECS debt. Never has the carbon footprint of multinational corporations been under such intense scrutiny. Intercity train journeys and long-haul flights to conduct face-to-face business meetings contribute significantly to greenhouse gases and the resulting strain on the environment. The Anglo-US company Teleris has introduced new video conferencing technology and partnered with the Carbon Neutral Company, enabling corporate outfits to become more environmentally responsible. The innovation allows simulated face-to-face meetings to be held across continents without the time, pressure, or environmental burden of international travel. Previous designs have enabled video conferencing on a point-to-point, dual-location basis. The firm's Virtual Live technology, however, can bring people together from up to 5 separate locations anywhere in the world, with unrivaled transmission quality.
In the literary world, it was an accepted assumption that the 1970s was a time of unprecedented growth in homegrown Australian fiction. And everybody was reading and talking about books by young Australian women. But it was not until recently that a researcher was able to measure just how many novels were published in that decade. And she found that there had been a decline in novels by Australian writers overall, but confirmed an increase in women's novels. It is this sort of research testing ideas about literary history that is becoming possible with the spread of digital humanities. The intersection of humanities and digital technologies is opening up opportunities in the fields of literature, linguistics, history, and language that without computational methods and digitized resources to bring information together in an accessible way. Transcription software is being developed for turning scans of books and documents into text as the field of digital humanities takes off. The process of delegation comprises the decision to delegate, the briefing, and the follow-up. At each of these points, anticipate the potential problems. When you delegate, you are delegating the right to perform an action. You are delegating the right to make decisions. It is important to be flexible, as the person to whom you delegate may have a better and faster way of completing a job than you. Despite all these, you retain the overall responsibility. It is helpful to others if you can provide constructive feedback on their performance.
Music is an important part of our lives. We connect and interact with it daily and use it as a way of projecting our self-identities to the people around us. The music we enjoy, whether it's country or classical, rock and roll or rap, reflects who we are. But where did music, at its core, first come from? It's a puzzling question that may not have a definitive answer. One leading researcher, however, has proposed that the key to understanding the origin of music is nestled snugly in the loving bond between mother and child. In a lecture at the University of Melbourne, Richard Parncutt, an Australian-born professor of systematic musicology, endorsed the idea that music originally spawned from motherese, the playful voices mothers adopt when speaking to infants and toddlers. As the theory goes, increased human brain sizes caused by evolutionary changes occurring between 1 and 2 million years ago resulted in earlier births, more fragile infants, and a critical need for stronger relationships between mothers and their newborn babies. According to Parncutt, who is based at the University of Graz in Austria, motherese arose as a way to strengthen this maternal bond and to help ensure an infant's survival.
This course provides students with an in-depth understanding of the exciting disciplines of politics and international relations and commerce. Students will learn about the workings of political institutions in countries around the world and explore the complex field of relations between nations. Topics in governance, public policy, public administration, national security, border control and commerce ensure that students receive a broad and current education in the range of issues which are covered under the label of politics and international relations and commerce. In addition to acquiring specialist knowledge and competencies in politics and international relations and commerce, students will graduate with a range of generic skills, such as critical thinking, enhanced communication abilities, problem solving, and strong capacities to work with others. They will also develop ethically based and socially responsible attitudes and behaviors.
Thomas Alva Edison was both a scientist and an inventor. Born in 1847, Edison would see tremendous change take place in his lifetime. He was also to be responsible for making many of those changes occur. When Edison was born, society still thought of electricity as a novelty, AFAD. By the time he died, entire cities were lit by electricity. Much of the credit for that progress goes to Edison. In his lifetime, Edison patented 1,093 inventions, earning him the nickname the Wizard of Menlo Park. The most famous of his inventions was the incandescent light bulb. Besides the light bulb, Edison developed the phonograph and the kinetoscope, a SM-all-A box for viewing moving films. Thomas Edison is also the first person in the US to make his film strips. He also improved upon the original design of the stock ticker, the telegraph, and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. He believed in hard work, sometimes working 20 hours a day. Edison was quoted as saying, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." In tribute to this important American, electric lights in the United States were dimmed for 1 minute on October 21, 1931, a few days after his death.
The narrative of law and order is located fundamentally at the level of individual guilt and responsibility. Criminal acts are seen as individual issues of personal responsibility and culpability to which the state responds by way of policing, prosecution, adjudication, and punishment. This is but one level at which crime and criminal justice can be analyzed. The problem is that so often analysis ends there, at the level of individual action, characterized in terms of responsibility, guilt, evil. In few other areas of social life does individualism have this hold, to take but one instance. It would be absurd to restrict analysis of obesity to individual greed. It should similarly be widely seen as absurd to restrict analysis of criminal justice issues to the culpability of individuals.
To learn the speech of alchemy, an early form of chemistry in which people attempted to turn metals into gold, it helps to think back to a time when there was no science, no atomic number or weight, no periodic chart, no list of elements. To the alchemists, the universe was not made of leptons, bosons, gluons, and quarks. Instead, it was made of substances. And one substance, say, walnut oil, could be just as pure as another, say, silver, even though modern scientists would say one is heterogeneous and the other homogeneous. Without knowledge of atomic structures, how would it be possible to tell elements from compounds?
Seminars are not designed to be mini lectures. Their educational role is to provide an opportunity for you to discuss interesting and/or difficult aspects of the course. This is founded on the assumption that it is only by actively trying to use the knowledge that you have acquired from lectures and texts that you can achieve an adequate understanding of the subject. If you do not understand a point, it is highly unlikely that you will be the only person in the group in that position. You will invariably be undertaking service for the entire group if you come to the seminar equipped with questions on matters which you feel you did not fully understand. The seminar is to provoke discussion.
Paris is very old. There has been a settlement there for at least 6,000 years, and its shape has been determined in part by the River Seine, and in part by the edicts of France's rulers. But the great boulevards we admire today are relatively new, and were constructed to prevent any more barricades being created by the rebellious population. That work was carried out in the middle 19th century. The earlier Paris had been in part a maze of narrow streets and alleyways. But you can imagine that the work was not only highly expensive, but caused great distress among the 500,000 or so residents whose houses were simply razed, and whose neighborhoods disappeared. What is done cannot usually be undone, especially when buildings are torn down. Usually be undone, especially when buildings are torn down.
It is tempting to try to prove that good looks win votes, and many academics have tried. The difficulty is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you cannot behold a politician's face without a veil of extraneous prejudice getting in the way. Does George Bush possess a disarming grin or a facetious smirk? It's hard to find anyone who can look at the president without assessing him politically as well as physically.
At the beginning of the 21st century, the relationship between standard and non-standard language is evidently still an uncertain one. We are at a transitional point between two eras. We seem to be leaving an era when the rules of standard English, as elected and defined by prescriptive grammarians, totally conditioned our sense of acceptable usage, so that all other usages and varieties were considered to be inferior or corrupt, and excluded from serious consideration. And we seem to be approaching an era when non-standard usages and varieties previously denigrated or ignored are achieving a new presence and respectability within society, reminiscent of that found in Middle English when dialect variation in literature was widespread and uncontentious. But we are not there yet. The rise of standard English has resulted in a confrontation between the standard and non-standard dimensions of the language which has lasted for over 200 years, and this has had traumatic consequences which will take some years to eliminate. Once people have been given an inferiority complex about the way they speak or write, they find it difficult to shake off.
You have about 30 minutes to answer each question. You must take account of how many marks are available for each part when you answer it. Even if you think you can write more, don't spend 15 minutes answering a part worth only 5 marks. Leave space at the end of your answer and come back to it if you have time to spare later. And if you can't think of an answer to some part, leave a space and move on to the next part. Don't write about something else if you don't know the correct answer. This is just a waste of your valuable time and the examiner's.
If you see a movie or a TV advertisement that involves a fluid behaving unusually, it was probably made using technology based on the work of a Monash researcher, Professor Joseph Monahan, who pioneered an influential method for interpreting the behavior of liquids that underlies most special effects involving water, has been honored with election to the Australian Academy of Sciences. Professor Monahan, one of only 17 members elected in 2011, was recognized for developing the method of smoothed particle hydrodynamics, SPH, which has applications in the fields of astrophysics, engineering, and physiology, as well as movie special effects. His research started in 1977 when he tried to use computer simulation to describe the formation of stars and stellar systems. The algorithms available at the time were incapable of describing the complicated systems that evolve out of chaotic clouds of gas in the galaxy. Professor Monaghan and his colleague Bob Gingold took the novel and effective approach of replacing the fluid or gas in the simulation with large numbers of particles with properties that mimicked those of the fluid. SPH has become a central tool in astrophysics, where it is currently used to simulate the evolution of the universe after the Big Bang, the formation of stars, and the processes of planet building.
This summer, 41 UBC alumni and friends participated in expeditions to the Canadian Arctic and the legendary Northwest Passage. Presentations, conversations, and learning accompanied their exploration of the great outdoors aboard the Russian-flagged Academic Fill, designed and built in Finland as a scientific research vessel in 1989. Her bridge was open to passengers virtually 24 hours a day. Experts on board presented on topics including climate change, wildlife, Inuit culture and history, and early European explorers. UBC Professor Michael Byers presented on the issue of Arctic sovereignty, a growing cause of debate as the ice melts, new shipping routes open, and natural resources become accessible. Recommended pre-trip reading was late UBC alumnus Pierre Burton's book, The Arctic Grail.
David Lynch is professor and head of education at Charles Darwin University. Prior to this, he was sub-dean in the Faculty of Education and Creative Arts at Central Queensland University and foundation head of the university's Noosa campus. David's career in education began as a primary school teacher in Queensland in the early 1980s and progressed to 4 principal positions before entering higher education. David's research interests predominate in teacher education, with a particular interest in building teacher capability to meet a changing world.
Egg-eating snakes are a small group of snakes whose diet consists only of eggs. Some eat only small eggs, which they have to swallow whole, as the snake has no teeth. Instead, some other snakes eat bigger eggs, but it requires special treatment. These snakes have spines that stick out from the backbone. The spines crack the egg open as it passes through the throat.
Complementary therapies, such as those practiced by naturopaths, chiropractors, and acupuncturists, have become increasingly popular in Australia over the last few decades. Interest initially coincided with enthusiasm for alternative lifestyles, while immigration and increased contact and trade with China have also had an influence. The status of complementary therapies is being revisited in a number of areas: legal regulation, the stances of doctors' associations, their inclusion in medical education, and scientific research into their efficacy.
A dog may be man's best friend, but man is not always a dog's. Over the centuries, selective breeding has pulled at the canine body shape to produce what is often a grotesque distortion of the underlying wolf. Indeed, some of these distortions are, when found in people, regarded as pathologies. Dog breeding does, though, offer a chance to those who would like to understand how body shape is controlled. The ancestry of pedigree pooches is well recorded. Their generation time is short, and their litter size reasonably large, so there is plenty of material to work with. Moreover, breeds are, by definition, inbred, and this simplifies genetic analysis. Those such as Elaine Ostrander, of America's National Human Genome Research Institute, who wish to identify the genetic basis of the features of particular pedigrees, thus have an ideal experimental animal.
What history books tell us about the past is not everything that happened, but what historians have therefore selected. They cannot put in everything. Choices have to be made. Choices must similarly be made about which aspects of the past should be formally taught to the next generation in the shape of school history lessons. So, for example, when a national school curriculum for England and Wales was first discussed at the end of the 1980s, the history curriculum was the subject of considerable public and media interest. Politicians argued about it, people wrote letters to the press about it, the Prime Minister of the time, Margaret Thatcher, intervened in the debate. Let us think first about the question of content. There were two main camps on this issue: those who thought the history of Britain should take pride of place, and those who favoured what was referred to as world history. In a sequence of bestsellers, including The Language Instinct and How the Mind Works, Pinker has argued the swathes of our mental, social and emotional lives may have originated as evolutionary adaptations, well suited to the lives our ancestors eked out on the Pleistocene savanna. Sometimes it seems as if nothing is immune from being explained this way. Road rage, adultery, marriage, altruism, our tendency to reward senior executives with corner offices on the top floor, and the smaller number of women who become mechanical engineers. All may have their roots in natural selection, Pinker claims. The controversial implications are obvious, that men and women might differ in their inborn abilities at performing certain tasks, for example, or that parenting may have little influence on personality. Omniscience may be a foible of men, but it is not so of books. Knowledge, as Johnson said, is of two kinds. You may know a thing yourself, and you may know where to find it. Now the amount which you may know yourself must, at its best, be limited. But what you may know of the sources of information may, with proper training, become almost boundless. And here come the value and use of reference books, the working of one book in connection with another, and applying your intelligence to both. By this means we get as near to that omniscient volume which tells everything as ever we all get. And although the single volume or work which tells everything does not exist, there is a vast number of reference books in existence, knowledge and proper use of which is essential to every intelligent person. Necessary as I believe reference books to be, they can easily be made to be contributory to idleness, and too mechanical a use should not be made of them.
Dictatorship is not a modern concept. 2,000 years ago, during the period of the Roman Republic, exceptional powers were sometimes given by the Senate to individual dictators, such as Sulla and Julius Caesar. The intention was that the dictatorship would be temporary and that it would make it possible to take swift and effective action to deal with an emergency. There is some disagreement as to how the term should be applied today. Should it be used in its original form to describe the temporary exercise of emergency powers? Or can it now be applied in a much broader sense, as common usage suggests?
Currently, there is concern about the increasing amount of time children spend engaged in sedentary activities, the number of children who fail to achieve minimum daily physical activity guidelines, i.e. 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity activities every day, and the apparent increase in obesity prevalence as a result of such sedentary behavior. Screen-based activities, including television viewing and playing computer games, are among the most frequently observed sedentary activities that children partake, with children spending 2.5 to 4 hours per day participating in such activities. The introduction of active video games, AVGs, into the gaming market presents an opportunity to convert traditional sedentary screen time into active screen time and thus increase total daily energy expenditure, e.e. Modern AVGs utilize cameras and motion sensors to allow the gamer to physically perform a variety of actions, dependent on the console, such as swinging a tennis racket or running. The most demanding AVGs provided similar responses to walking and, based on international standards, should be classified as low-intensity activities. Whilst AVGs may provide children with a better alternative to sedentary gaming, they are not a sufficient replacement for normal physical activity, for example sports and outdoor play.
The 6 programs represented here report that word of mouth is by far their most effective recruitment tool, particularly because it typically yields candidates who are similar to previously successful candidates. Moreover, satisfied candidates and school systems are likely to spread the word without any special effort on the part of their program. Other, less personal advertising approaches such as radio and television spots and local newspaper advertisements have also proven fruitful, especially for newer programs. New York uses a print advertising campaign to inspire dissatisfied professionals to become teachers. Subway posters send provocative messages to burned out or disillusioned professionals. Tired of diminishing returns? Invest in NYC Kids was just one of many Madison Avenue-inspired invitations. News coverage has also proven to be a boon to alternative programs. When the New York Times, for example, ran a story about the district's alternative route program, 2,100 applications flooded in over the next 6 weeks.
People are spending twice as much time online compared to 10 years ago, fueled by increasing use of tablets and smartphones. The biggest increase has been among young adults, with time spent online almost tripling from 10 hours and 24 minutes each week in 2005 to 27 hours and 36 minutes in 2014. In total, the average adult spends more than 20 hours online a week, which includes time spent on the internet at work. Meanwhile, the average person spends 2.5 hours every week online while on the move, away from their home, work, or place of study. This is a 5-fold increase from 2005, when the figure was just 30 minutes. Overall, the proportion of adults using the internet has risen by half, from 6 in 10 in 2005 to almost 9 in 10 today. According to Ofcom's Media Use and Attitudes 2015 report, which questioned 1,890 adults aged 16 and over about their internet consumption habits.
Part of the fun of experimenting with granular materials, says Stephen W. Morris, is the showmanship. In one stunt that he has demonstrated in settings ranging from high school classrooms to television studios, the University of Toronto, physicist loads clear plastic tubes with white table salt and black sand and starts them rotating. What transpires in the tubes usually knocks the socks off of any unsuspecting bystander. Instead of mixing into a drab grey sameness, the sand particles slowly separate into crisp black bands cutting across a long, narrow field of salt. As the spinning continues, some bands disappear and new ones arise. It's a parlor trick, Morris says. Not to deny its entertainment value, this demonstration of how strangely granular materials can behave is also an authentic experiment in a field both rich in fundamental physics and major practical consequences. Yet granular mixing today remains more of an art than a science, says chemical engineer Fernando J.
The best way to experience the museum is from the top floor down. One emerges from the elevators into a spacious hallway. At some hours, museum staff members are giving SM all hands-on demonstrations of techniques such as quill work. These activities take place near WAL cases filled with objects. These SM all surveys of the museum's vast holdings are called windows on the collection. Appearing on every floor in the halls that overlook the rotunda, these display cases serve as a kind of visible storage, presenting a panoply of objects and materials. Their arrangements are artistic, and their contents, perhaps, intentionally designed to jar the visitor. For example, the largest case on the fourth floor displays animal imagery of all sorts. Older sculptures of birds, mammals, and sea creatures appear alongside witty contemporary works such as Larry Beck's version of a Yupik mask made of rubber tire treads and metal tools, and Jim Shoppert's Walrus Loves Baby Clams mask. Recently made ivory carvings challenge the common distinction between so-called authentic fine art and commodity, a distinction which may be passé in the academic world, but which still holds strong among much of the general public. Emerald is defined by its green color. To be an emerald, a specimen must have a distinctly green color that falls in the range from bluish-green to slightly yellowish-green. To be an emerald, the specimen must also have a rich color. Stones with weak saturation or light tone should be called green beryl. If the beryl's color is greenish-blue, then it is an aquamarine. If it is greenish-yellow, it is heliodor. This color definition is a source of confusion. Which hue, tone, and saturation combinations are the dividing lines between green beryl and emerald? Professionals in the gem and jewelry trade can disagree on where the lines should be drawn. Some believe that the name emerald should be used when chromium is the cause of the green color, and that stones colored by vanadium should be called green beryl. Calling a gem an emerald instead of a green beryl can have a significant impact upon its price and marketability. This color confusion exists within the United States. In some other countries, any beryl with a green color, no matter how faint, is called an emerald.
Bones also protect the body's organs. The skull protects the brain and forms the shape of the face. The spinal cord, a pathway for messages between the brain and the body, is protected by the backbone or spinal column. The ribs form a cage that shelters the heart and lungs, and the pelvis helps protect the bladder, part of the intestines, and in women, the reproductive organs. Bones are made up of a framework of a protein called collagen, with a mineral called calcium phosphate that makes the framework hard and strong. Bones store calcium and release some into the bloodstream when it's needed by other parts of the body. The amounts of certain vitamins and minerals that you eat, especially vitamin D and calcium, directly affect how much calcium is stored in the bones. Joints are where two bones meet. They make the skeleton flexible. Without them, movement would be impossible.
The APS supports the development of an Australian curriculum for psychological science. The APS Division of Psychological Research, Education and Training, DPRET, in consultation with teacher and curriculum representatives from every state and territory in Australia, has developed a proposed framework for senior secondary school studies in psychological science. This framework is modeled on the current senior science curricula that were developed and published by the Australian Curriculum, Assessment and Reporting Authority. The APS hopes that this framework will facilitate a dialogue between educators and their local curriculum authority, with the aim of working towards a more consistent approach to the teaching of psychological science at secondary school level and optimizing the preparation for students going on to undergraduate psychology studies at university, as well as the effective use of psychological principles in everyday life.
Over the last 10,000 years, there seem to have been two separate and conflicting building sentiments throughout the history of towns and cities. One is the desire to start again for a variety of reasons. An earthquake or a tidal wave may have demolished the settlement, or fire destroyed it, or the new city marks a new political beginning. The other can be likened to the effect of a magnet. Established settlements attract people, who tend to come whether or not there is any planning for their arrival. The clash between these two sentiments is evident in every established city, unless its development has been almost completely accidental, or is lost in history. Incidentally, many settlements have been planned from the beginning, but, for a variety of reasons, no settlement followed the plan. A good example is Currowan, on the Clyde River in New South Wales, which was surveyed in the second half of the 19th century, in expectation that people would come to establish agriculture and a SMLA port, but no one came. Most country towns in New South Wales started with an original survey, whose grid lines are still there today in the pattern of the original streets.
Film is where art meets commerce. As Orson Welles said, a painter just needs a brush and the writer just needs a pen, but the producer needs an army. And an army needs money. A producer is just like an entrepreneur. We raise money to make films. First, we need to find an original idea or a book or a play and purchase the rights. Then we need money to develop that idea, often a reasonably small sum. Besides, to commission a writer for the screenplay isn't something you would want to gamble your own money on, so you find a partner. We are lucky here in the UK as we have Film 4, BBC Films, and the UK Film Council, all of which are good places to develop an idea. Producing in Britain is very different to producing in America or even Europe because the economic dynamic is different.
The amount of sleep you need depends on many factors, especially your age. Newborns sleep between 16 and 18 hours a day, and preschool children should sleep between 10 and 12 hours. Older children and teens need at least 9 hours to be well rested. For most adults, 7 to 8 hours a night appears to the best amount of sleep. However, for some people, enough sleep may be as few as 5 hours or as many as 10 hours of sleep. As you get older, your sleeping patterns change. Older adults tend to sleep more lightly and awaken more frequently in the night than younger adults. This can have many causes, including medical conditions and medications used to treat them. But there's no evidence that older adults need less sleep than younger adults. Getting enough sleep is important to your health because it boosts your immune system, which makes your body better able to fight disease. Sleep is necessary for your nervous system to work properly. Too little sleep makes you drowsy and unable to concentrate. It also impairs memory and physical performance. So, how many hours of sleep are enough for you? Experts say that if you feel drowsy during the day, even during boring activities, you are not getting enough sleep. Also, quality of sleep is just as important as quantity. People whose sleep is frequently interrupted or cut short are not getting quality sleep. If you experience frequent daytime sleepiness, even after increasing the amount of quality sleep you get, talk to your doctor. He or she may be able to identify the cause of sleep problems and offer advice on how to get a better night's sleep. Comparing the intelligence of animals of different species is difficult. How do you compare a dolphin and a horse? Psychologists have a technique for looking at intelligence that does not require the cooperation of the animal involved. The relative size of an individual's brain is a reasonable indication of intelligence. Comparing across species is not as simple. An elephant will have a larger brain than a human simple because it is a large beast. Instead, we use the cephalization index, which compare the size of an animal's brain to the size of its body. Based on the cephalization index, the brightest animals on the planet are humans, followed by great apes, porpoises, and elephants. As a general rule, animals that hunt for a living, like canines, are smarter than strict vegetarians. You don't need much intelligence to outsmart a leaf of lettuce. Animals that live in social groups are always smarter and have large EQs than solitary animals.